Hi guys, in this video we are going to create this 2D 3D animation in Blender with the help of Grease Pencil. I'm going to use this reference image that I got from Pinterest to create the environment first, and then I'll start drawing 2D characters with the help of Grease Pencil and will also animate them. So this video will mainly include modeling, toon shading, Grease Pencil drawing and animation, and some compositing in the end. So let's get started with the modeling process. Now let's open the reference image that we are going to use for creating this 3D environment. I've already downloaded the reference image from Pinterest. Now let's start with the cube and scale it in the Z direction and also scale it a little bit in the x-axis. Now add another cube and place it right above this first object and scale it in the x-axis and move it just a little in the y-axis. Now select these two edges and move them up by extruding. After extruding them, then select these vertices and merge them in the center. Now add another edge loop by pressing Ctrl R and move it a little in the y-axis and close these open faces by selecting the edges and then press F. Now add an edge loop by pressing Ctrl R and then extrude this face. Now add another edge loop by pressing Ctrl R and extrude this newly made face and move it in the y-axis. Now here I'm going to separate these faces by pressing P and then select selection, adding a bunch of edge loops once again by pressing Ctrl R and then scroll with your mouse. Now select these alternate edges and move them up by pressing G and then Z, and bevel these edges by pressing Ctrl B. Now select these sharp edges and press Ctrl B to smooth them out. Now let's add another cube by pressing Shift A, scale it down, move it in the y-axis and then scale it down in the x-axis, move it down a little bit and then scale it again in the y-axis. So here I'm adding a bunch of edge loops to get this unique shape. I'm just using my mental library at this point and not trying to follow the reference image. Once you're done with the shape, now select the object and press Shift D to duplicate and move them in the x-axis. Make sure they are at the same distance from each other. Now add two edge loops in the horizontal plane and two in the vertical plane. Here we are trying to make these windows like we see in the reference image, the vertical windows. Scale the windows in the x-axis to get this vertical shape. Now add an edge loop around each of these faces. Scale it in the x around both of these faces and select these faces and extrude them by pressing E, and extrude the border outside by pressing E once again to get these window-like shape. Now add a cube by pressing Shift A, scale it in the Z-axis, move it up, move it inside the object just a little, and then select the top face and scale and extrude by pressing S and E to get some details. Now add an edge loop in the center by pressing Ctrl R. Add another edge loop in the horizontal plane and select these two faces and insert them by pressing I. Move them closer a little bit. And now add another edge loop on each side and move these vertices in the Z-axis by pressing G and then Z. Extrude these faces by pressing E and scale just a little. Now duplicate these objects and put them right underneath this window. We are trying to match the reference image, but we are still trying to not copy everything. Now select this face and separate it by pressing P and then select selection. Add a few edge loops and insert these faces by pressing I, extrude by pressing E. Here I'm just inserting this face to get some details at the top. Now select these side faces and scale them by pressing S and then X. Now add these extra edges to smooth out the corners. Now add a cylinder and scale it in the Z-axis. Now try to place it exactly where you see in the reference image. And make sure that the cylinder object does not clip into the other objects. And then select the top face and scale and extrude by pressing S and E to add some details. Add more edge loops where you need them. Now select the top face and once again extrude and scale. Add 2 more edge loops for the window. Once again adding these edge loops by pressing Ctrl R and then scale them along the normals by pressing Alt E. Now select the bottom face and scale and extrude here as well to add some details. After finishing up with this cylinder, now let's add another cylinder by pressing Shift A. Once again trying to follow the reference image and make sure that the cylinder object does not clip into the other objects. Select the top face, scale and extrude once again. You can also play here with what kind of details you want, how many edge loops you want to have and how many details you want. You don't have to follow the reference. You can always kind of use your creative freedom and try to play around with the scene. Here just adding a bunch of edge loops to add more details, and adding windows by selecting faces and then extruding by pressing E. Once you're done with the cylinder objects, now let's add another cylinder, but make sure you turn down the resolution, scale it in the Z-axis. We are trying to create this cylindrical shape like in the reference image in the middle. Select the top face, extrude and scale by pressing E and then S. Once again using the existing objects and duplicating them in the X-axis to add details. Now for the window, just insert this face by pressing I and then E to extrude inside and select the borders and extrude outside. Adding edge loops to create these square like shapes for the windows, and then insert the face by pressing I and select the borders and press E to extrude. Now let's model the foreground. Add a cube by pressing Shift A. And then add a cylinder by pressing Shift A once again and place it right underneath this cube. Place it on one corner and now duplicate the cylinder and place the other cylinders on the rest of the corners. Now scale all these cylinders in the Z-axis. Select the top face of this cube and extrude and scale by pressing S and E to add some details. After finishing this one pillar, duplicate it and place it on the other side. Add another cylinder, rotate it around the X-axis and delete these bottom vertices. Now scale these faces along the normals by pressing Alt E. Add an edge loop and try to smooth out the corners. Now add another cube, rotate it and extrude it to make the ground. So now we are done with the modeling. Let's start joining the objects. As we can see that we have a lot of objects right now in the scene. So let's start joining them. And we also need to rename all these objects to clean up our scene. After selecting the objects, right click and then select join. Now to rename any object, you can simply double left click on their names in the scene collection. Now let's go to the render view and start with lighting. Turn on the wireframe from overlays and now go to the light section in the properties panel. Increase the strength to 5 and make the angle 0 degrees for sharper shadows. Now here I'm just playing with the light in the scene to find something interesting. To find an interesting light setup, you can play with lights and see what works for you. Now here I'm adding a new world setting. Add a light path node by pressing Shift A and search for light path. Add a mix shader and place it right between the background and the world output node. Now add another background node, connect it to the mix shader, connect the light path to the mix shader as well, and now connect the mix shader to the world output. Now as you see, we can change the background color without affecting the lights in the main scene. So this new world setting will help us in controlling the background color. Now let's start with Toon Shading. Open the shader editor. Select an object that you want to toon shade. Add a new material by pressing on new. Delete this principal BSDF by pressing X. While the node is selected, add a diffuse BSDF. Then add a shader to RGB and a color ramp node. Connect all these nodes to the material output. Now we are going to use these handles here in the color ramp to control the shadows and the light part. Now for the toon shading, you can use any color references. You can find a lot of color references from the Pinterest. Here for this scene, I'm just going to kind of experiment with the color and see what I find more interesting. You can also just play with the color and see what works for you, or you can also use the color reference. Now I'm going to add another material for the same object. You can simply click on this plus icon and select the existing material and then select on this paper-like icon to kind of separate it from the first material. Now just change the color to have new colors for the shadow and the light parts. I'm going to use this teal color for these faces. Now let's select all these faces once again. Add another material. Once again use the existing one and then separate it by clicking on this paper-like icon and then change the color. This time I'm going to use this reddish brown color. Now I'm quickly going to add a lot of materials for all the other objects using the same process. Just select the faces and add materials and assign the material to the selected faces. Then you can just select the light color and the shadow color. This way you have some really good control over the light and the shadow parts. Now let's add some outlines to our scene. To do this, first we need to add a camera. To go to the camera view, you can simply press the numpad 0 on your keyboard. Now adjust the camera so that it covers the scene. Now if you find your scene clipping into the background, you can play with the clipping settings here in the camera section and increase the clip end to 1000. You can also change the focal length to get some depth in the scene. Now let's turn off the wireframe and then press Shift A and add some grease pencil outlines. You can increase the line thickness here in the modifiers tab. Now let's add another grease pencil object, a grease pencil stroke object, for adding more details into our scene. And go to draw mode, go to this stroke placement and select surface and add an offset value of 0.01. Increase the strength to 1. Turn off the pressure sensitivity. Go to the material option and select the gray material. Now select the paint mode and use the color picker tool to pick a color. Now I'm going to add some color variation in the shadow and the light parts here. So let's quickly do that. Make sure the grease pencil strokes stick to the surface and do not clip into the object. Now I'm going to add another grease pencil stroke object to draw some grease pencil lines over this scene. After adding the stroke object, go to the layer panel, turn off the lights, go to the material options and select the black material and go to draw mode. Make sure you have the surface option selected. Set the offset value to 0.01. After that, start drawing over the scene and see if the lines stick to the surface. I'm using the F pen tool here. Now I'm just going to start drawing around the scene and have some fun. You should just draw whatever comes to your mind. I kind of just make these shapes and draw along the edges to make the scene look a little interesting and look more like a 2D artwork. Now let's set up the scene before we start working on this 2D animation. Now before we start with the 2D animation, I'm going to hide some of these objects, the ones that we don't need, so that we have enough space to start drawing. You can hide objects in object mode or in edit mode by just simply selecting the object that you want to hide and then press H. And to unhide the objects, you can simply press Alt H. Now let's add a grease pencil stroke object for the character drawings. Now go to draw mode. Select the 3D cursor for the stroke placement and the XZ plane for the drawing plane. Also place the 3D cursor near the pillar. You can place the 3D cursor anywhere in your scene by just right clicking with your mouse. Now here I'm doing a rough sketch for the character. Just trying to get the shape and see how I want the character to look. After finishing with the rough sketch, I'm going to refine it with a new layer. Just roughly drawing the character. It's a female character who is leaning a little bit towards the pillar and looking in the front. Now go to the layer panel and add a new layer which is placed right above the rough sketch layer, and also decrease the opacity of the rough layer, and then start drawing the refined character on the new layer. Also make sure that you don't leave any spaces between the lines, because we are going to use this color fill tool later, and if we have any spaces between the lines, it will not work. Now you can delete the rough sketch layer, or you can just disable it. Now here I'm drawing a penguin following the same process just like we did for the character. First I'm drawing on this rough layer, a rough sketch of this penguin, and then I lower the opacity here of the rough layer and use this main layer to refine the drawing. I'm also drawing this decorative thing here, which will be animated later when the wind, and it will be kind of blowing with the wind. Now I'm drawing these two ducks on the left side. First I try to play with how I want my characters on the rough layer, and then I refine them on the main layer. Now here you can see we have some spaces between the lines, so I'm trying to make sure that we don't leave any spaces. Make sure you connect all these disconnected lines. Now this is just the first frame of this animation. We still have a lot of frames to do. To be able to animate this scene. So turn on the onion skin and start drawing the next keyframe. Now after finishing up with the lines, let's add another layer in the layer panel and name it Fill. We are going to use this layer for the colors and place it right beneath the lines layer. Add another material, name it Color. Turn off the stroke option and turn on the fill option. Now we can use the color fill tool and select the color that we want, and we can just left click on the grease pencil object to fill in the color. Make sure you close the lines layer so that you're only using the fill layer for coloring. Here I'm trying to see what colors I want to use. Make sure you fill in the colors for all the layers. Now let's quickly finish these ducks. First, you can see how it looks with the color. Now let's start coloring the character. Once again, go to the layer panel, add another layer for the colors and place it right underneath the lines layer. Go to the first frame and then go to draw mode, use the color fill tool and start coloring your character. Once again, after coloring the character in the first frame, make sure you color all the other frames as well. So for now we are just using the flat colors, and we will be shading the character later on with the new layer. Once again, repeat the same process for the penguin. Now after finishing the flat colors, I'm adding a new layer for the shading, for adding more details into the character. And now make sure you place the shading layer between the lines and the color. Once again, go to draw mode and lock the lines and the color layer and unlock the shading layer, and then just start shading your character. You can make it as detailed as you want, but remember, you would have to do it for all the other frames as well. Now once you're done with all the frames with the colors, lines and the shading, you can bring back all the hidden objects by pressing Alt-H in the object mode, and the objects that were hidden in the edit mode, you would have to go back to the edit mode and then press Alt-H to unhide them again. Now here, as you can see, the line art modifier is kind of overlapping with the grease pencil objects. So to solve this issue, you can simply go to the object properties of line art and go to the viewport section, go to the viewport display section and untick the in front option so that the outlines are not always in the front. Now let's open the compositor to add some bloom-like effects. So let's add a glare node by pressing Shift A and search for glare and put it right between these nodes and just play with these settings and see what works for you. You can also use the curves here in the render property on the right side. So with these settings you can play with the color after finishing your scene. You can add some contrast, you can do some color balancing here. This is where the video ends. I hope you liked the video. If you like my content and want to see more of these, you can subscribe, like and comment and let me know what you think about this.